So I'm going to start by saying my name is Nancy Fulton, and I have been running events. I've been teaching creative people how to earn a good living from their work for a long time. In 2015, I started Nancy Fulton Meetups because I liked running meetups a lot. And since then, I have been running one, two, four a month for a very long time. And many of them have been directed at authors, screenwriters, and producers. In tonight's workshop, we're going to be talking about film production, independent TV production, and a little bit both of those kinds of topics. If you're currently working to produce a film or a TV show, you know that over the last 5 to 6 years, the entertainment industry has hit sort of a huge series of shocks, and previously those impacts have been really hard on producers. But in 2025, it's already shaping up to be a very different landscape. The big streamers, studios, and distributors are finding the purchase, licensing, and even funding support for indie productions much more interesting than they have for a long while. But in order to take advantage of these opportunities, you really have to understand how to build projects that deliver exactly what banks, investors, distributors, streamers, and key talent and others need in order to fully commit to and support your production. You really can't work from an old playbook because these people need something different. A lot of people, if they go into the entertainment industry, they read the books and materials that they have access to, and a lot of those books are written in an entirely different year. Many of them are written before 2019. And that was like really different. Some of the most popular books were written like 2015. The first version might have been written in 2000. And a few of the really old ones, like what is it, from Real to Deal or whatever, it's like the 1980s. Our objective is to talk about 2025 and specifically what's different. We're going to be talking to Ray Ellingson. He's a producer with over 30 years of experience, more than 50 productions under his belt in a wide variety of roles. He has assembled a team of producers, marketers, and other experts with hundreds of profitable distributed independent productions under their belt and in wide release. Jeffrey Hardy is founder of Film Profit, LLC. Jeffrey has served as a film finance and distribution analyst for The Hollywood Reporter, Fortune Magazine, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Washington Times, and the Black Film Report. He has appeared before the California Film Commission and the National Media Network by invitation. He routinely consults with studios, producers, investors to analyze screenplays, production budgets, marketing strategies, distribution plans to maximize the profitability of profitable releases. Michael Praver, who has helped more than 60 filmmakers fund their production companies since 2015, is also with us tonight. He has a deep knowledge of unsecured credit options, business and corporate credit alternatives, equipment financing solutions, SBA programs, and he helps people move their projects forward more quickly. Grace Michaeliski works with MPMG to help actually move projects so that they can actually acquire the funding and support that they need. So I want to thank everybody that's on a panel tonight. Over the years, you've really helped Nancy Fulton Meetups, the events that I run, through sponsorship, through providing guests, and for sharing your insights with me when I call you up and I have questions about everything under the sun. Often I'm asking on behalf of the people that I support, and you've given me your time and your consideration when obviously you had much better things to do. And I think you guys are a great example of people who send the elevator back down to help other people on their way up. And I think it's really meaningful. So I'd like to start right now. If Jeffrey and Ray, can you spend a few moments talking about why 2025 is not 2024 or 2023 from a filmmaker's perspective, and why it's definitely not 2019 or 2020? Can you go over what's changed? And I'd like to start briefly with Jeffrey, because I think from a film analytics standpoint, you've got a good understanding of specifically how this market is different for filmmakers.
I work in two kinds of realms of motion picture making, smaller budget and bigger budget. We're not going to really discuss the bigger budget stuff here generally right now. Primarily what we are developing and guiding are pictures that are sub 10, sub 15, million, okay, with a big cluster around about 5 million or so. And some below that. So how 2025 is different from 2024 and 2023. Number one is the guild upheaval, which I'm not making any negative statement about it. I think probably it really needed to be done, primarily because the streamers had broken the model and cut the income stream to a lot of crafts and talent. That said, it caused kind of an implosion in developed and properly ready to go pictures. That created a vacuum in 2024. That vacuum in 2024, all the studios were trying to stuff it with giant projects to kickstart it, and there was a lot of failure in the first half of the year. Okay, so for indies are constantly under the umbrella of those folks and how they operate. We can now break out in 2025, and we're seeing it in the pictures that are being released, the pictures that are getting noticed, the way even that a lot of people are funding things differently from how they were before, always looking to a studio to give me money, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot more entrepreneurialism in 2025 is what I see. And I see that, notwithstanding the paroxysms that came out of 23 and COVID and all of that, that in 2025, we have a bit clearer sailing. One little addendum to that, every time there has been a downturn, there have been entrepreneurs who have stuck their heads up out of the soil and started a new course. And this goes all the way back to the 80s. Miramax's, so many different groups of people. And I see that happening now too. As long as they don't try to grow too gigantic, I think we have a course that we can follow. Can't hear you, Nancy.
You're on mute, Nancy.
Hi, Ray. Can you go ahead and talk for a few minutes about how you see,
Sure.
from a business perspective, the change this year from
Sure,
what
absolutely.
you've had to deal with recently?
I think 2020 to 2023 was no man's land for the filmmakers, especially independent filmmakers. I think what's happening now in 2025 is last year, and look, I'm not going to get into politics or Democrats or Republicans. I don't care either way. But from a business standpoint, you've got somebody who's coming in to office who is very business minded. In the last 4 years, because of COVID and other mismanagement of certain federal funds, the SBA, which is the Small Business Administration, which as filmmakers, everybody here should know about the SBA's 7A Capline program. It is full funding up to $5 million. It's 7.5% fixed interest on a 2-year line of credit. I can go into that. Michael Praver can certainly go into that a lot deeper later on. But from a finance standpoint, a business standpoint, the SBA is one of the lowest hanging fruit methods of getting finance for independent films under 5 million. And what's happening is under the Biden administration, and I'm not blaming Democrats or Republicans again, but under the last administration, because of COVID, because of the PPP loans, because of all these things that happened, the SBA got drained down to zero. Trump is putting $2 billion with a B, $2 billion in to the SBA on January 20th. So what's happening is the banks are getting regulated again under the new administration. You're finding interest rates are going to start going down. You're going to find a lot of things happening financially that make a lot of sense for filmmakers. You're going to see available financing through things like the SBA and other programs, NorCal, some of these other administrations that are out there. And I think if we start looking as filmmakers as the film business as a business, then we're going to have a lot better chance of being successful in making our films this year.
Cool. I think we're all waiting to see. I think you mentioned before we got on the call that a lot of the banks are actually holding off on doing anything until the end of the month because
I
we don't know what's going to be happening. It could be the case that some of the promises that are made fall through. It could be they are less favorable or more favorable than we expect them to be. So we're in a no man's land. But it does seem to be the case that there's not the desire to keep the budgets in line or obey the debt ceilings or anything like that. It's one of those situations where it may be the case that a lot of money gets pumped into the economy because people are in the mood to try to increase business throughput because that's the kind of country that we live in just generally. Whether there's from whether it actually happens in states as well. There's times when the state's in the mood to actually pump money into the economy, and there's times when there's not. And the same is true at the federal level as well. But the important thing to understand is that this is definitely going to be a time where there's going to be a huge push to try to start pushing money around and trying to make it look, a lot of numbers look good on a national level. When the statistics look great, everybody thinks people are doing well. There's going to be this huge push, and when that happens, it translates into more money being available.
well, yeah, and I think
that's hopeful.
I spoke with several bankers today actually who are saying they're waiting till the 22nd to see what happens, but they're pretty sure things are moving forward. Once interest rates go down, once there are more incentive programs for investors on the federal level under the 181 tax codes, 167K, some of these other taxes, you're going to see that the banks are more willing to say, hey, as an investor, park your money here, we'll give you a line of credit, which protects the investor's money. I think these things are happening in 2025, which are going to make it a lot easier for filmmakers to access financing.
I definitely agree. And I also think paired with the information that Jeffrey just talked about in terms of the fact that the big streamers have changed their business models to a tremendous degree. And it's turning out to be the case that they are going to be purchasing content. They're going to be licensing content in a way that they really haven't done for many years, to a degree that they haven't for many years. It's a warmer market than it has been for a long time. So with that in mind, it's not going to be the case that money's just going to be pouring into the pockets of every single filmmaker. Some projects are going to be able to go forward, and they're going to be able to find the support they need. $5 million, you can buy an apartment building for $5 million. So if somebody's putting $5 million into a project, it's because it's going to make money, and it's going to have to make money for a $5 million film. $5 to $10 million film has to actually work from a business standpoint. Can you talk about the process by which you create a film that people will actually get behind, from the investors to the talent, to the banks, to the distributors? Like, there's all these people that have to come together to stand behind the filmmaker to say, yeah, we're going to back your project. And Ray, you're probably the best person to address that specifically, because your forte and your particular interest is in developing projects so they can move forward.
Sure. And I think development is the key word here in this conversation. You're looking at, what does it take? I've got an idea as a filmmaker. What's it take to get it on the screen? And again, it's a business model. The first thing you need to do, and again, everybody has this sort of euphemistic concept of what quote unquote development is. For us, all development is, excuse me, is just a laundry list of things that you have to have in place in order to meet the requirements for production funding. And what I mean by that is, whether you're going through debt financing, which is how 90% of films are getting made, whether you're going through deficit financing, which is through somebody like Amazon or Hulu, getting a deficit financing model deal with them, or whether you're going through private equity through somebody like Gulf Capital, they all want to see the same things. They want to see risk mitigation, and they want to see collateral. Those are the two bookends of development. Risk mitigation is the form of analytics data. In fact, we have the top analytics guy in the industry right here on this with us tonight. They do comparisons and trends, market analysis, projections, world release data metrics, audience saturation reports, all the stuff you and I could care less about. Sorry, Jeff. But all the stuff that you and I don't care about are things that anybody from a financial model is going to want to see. They want to see who's our audience? How do we reach that audience? What's the saturation point of that audience? How we like all these questions get answered in analytics. And when Jeff's company puts together an analytics package for our clients or for us, it's literally 100 to 130 pages of data. It's like a phone book. And it has all of these elements that are necessary to convince people who are in a financial position to mitigate the risk and make them feel comfortable that this makes business sense to invest in. That's one end of it. The other end is a collateral instrument, and that is no less than a distribution sales agreement with minimum sales guarantees and or pre-sales in the foreign market. Everybody complains, I can't get distribution. You can, but there's a methodology to getting a producer's representative on board who's going to represent you, take it to a distributor and convince them that they should write you a minimum sales guarantee. And the way you do that is through development. You put together analytics, you build an audience, you take care of your legal formation, you put together a budget and schedule that's bondable. There are all these elements of development which are necessary to create those elements to receive financing. And that's the sort of keystone of getting, you asked what's the process to getting through this. Part of that is also bringing on a casting director in some cases during development so that they can go ahead and at least get cast list quotes and availability to find out who's available for this project.
You mentioned that there were debt-based deals. Do those people, if I'm Hulu and I want to buy, I say, look, okay, I'll agree that if your project meets these parameters, I will go ahead and provide you with a funding solution or help participate in your funding solution. Are they looking for the same documentation as well?
Yes, the short answer is yes. And I can give you an example. I did a film with Sci-Fi Channel, and it was a deficit financing model. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term deficit financing, you go to somebody like in my case with Sci-Fi Channel or Hulu or Amazon or whoever you're going to, Max, which is formerly HBO, Max, which is formerly HBO, who knows what they are now. But if you're going to one of these streaming services, I went to Sci-Fi, I said, hey, I got this project we're doing called Pandemic. They said, great, we will go ahead and write you a contract that says upon delivery, we're going to air this and we'll give you a 2-year contract for airing for this feature film. And so they said, I think they're at Pacific Mercantile Bank, because each of these streaming services, like I know HBO's over at City National, you've got Hulu's over at Western Alliance. So they all have banks they do business with. So in my case, it was Pacific Mercantile Bank. And they said, okay, go over to Pacific Mercantile. You're going to talk to Art Stribley. He's going to go ahead and set you up. And we're going to do a contract that you're going to give to the bank, and they're going to issue you a line of credit for the amount that you need to finance this. And upon delivery, we'll cover that note. So that's pretty much how a deficit financing, and I'm oversimplifying certain elements of that, but and I'm sure I'm making Michael cringe because he knows there's much more details to financing than that, but that's pretty much the short version of it.
So one more thing I just wanted to touch on. Jeffrey had mentioned before we were on the call, he'd mentioned the fact that I think you said HBO cracked the code. They figured out about the fact that they had serialized content. They don't release unlike Netflix, which tends to release all of a series on a particular day. Netflix manages to get its subscribers to continue to renew because it doesn't put it out all on one day. And their model tends to rely on producing episodic content instead of films. Can you talk a little bit about, Jeffrey, can you talk just a few minutes about when you're developing the business plan for an episodic piece, is it more expensive, the same price as doing a film? How does that work?
I thought you were going in a slightly different way, so I was going to give a little bit of history, but serial content is harder to do. because you have a more complex financial model and you have a more complex business model. And Ray was talking about deficit financing. Often deficit financing is used in serial, had been used a lot in serial content. Serial content is going through a transmogrification now, certainly because of streamers. The way HBO cracked the code was they stumbled into making serial content that kept their subscribers. In the world of these platforms, it's ARPU, you know, how much money you're making per month off of these people per year, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to keep them. That's when they leave, it's called churn. They leave, they come back, or they leave and never come back. Somebody else comes in, that's churn. So you want to, their business problem is churn. They focus everything on that. So HBO stumbled into that, and that created the great renaissance of television, the golden age of television. Okay, HBO created that. Now, the digital platforms have followed a lot the same methodology, okay? But so that serial content then is really their golden pot. And the feature films and things are extremely important, but they can't help them control churn. It's serial content. So what we are is in feature material is we're the cherry and the whipped cream and everything on top of the sundae. Okay, that's how I see it. With serial content, if we're making serial content on my end, I have to analyze a lot more. I have to understand exactly what we can get per episode. I have to play it out across time. And somebody may come to me with something that's a 6-part mini-series, let's call it, or the like, a limited series, or it may be that they're shooting for conventional series, which goes on to additional years, etc. So that is a much more complex model. Yes, it costs more to do a business plan for it, but mainly, now we have another one that we've been working on that really was decided in development, in our team, decided in development that it would really work as a series. So what we're doing is we're modeling it as a feature film, and the producer's rep wants to take it in as a backdoor series. Much cheaper in every way, and you may have a distributable content, but you also may be able to blow it up into a series. I hope I didn't stray too far afield in that answer.
That was a good answer. That was actually a really good answer, because it explains it how to bridge the gap. So Ray, can you and I was just wondering if you and Michael could talk for a few minutes about Jeffrey had said that the thing about if you're going to do films at a $5 million budget level and above, or even $1 million budget or above, you have to consider yourself an entrepreneur, and you have to think about the long term. It's not just one film. It's going to be, you have to think in terms of producing, you're going into a business, you're starting a company or a series of companies that are going to produce content. So you think entrepreneurially. And you had talked also about the fact that you need development funding because you have to be able to pay people to work with you to put together the project, to attach the talent and so forth. Can you talk a little about how you put together, like what development funding usually covers, and how Michael helps advise people on the different kinds of funding they might need, like when it makes sense to work with the SBA, when it makes sense to use business credit lines, like
Sure.
it seems like there's a lot of different kinds of funding requirements.
Let me address, if I may, Michael. Let's
Please.
address two things really quick. One is there are two types of financing in film or television. One is development financing and one is production financing. And they get mixed up a lot, but they are two totally separate things. Development financing is the monies or financing that you need in order to put together the package that meets the requirements for production funding. And production funding is, of course, the cost of your actual production. So and there's other like marketing costs, but let's just talk about development financing and production financing. And when we're talking about those two things, let's talk about first with development financing. Let's look at both of these business models. If I'm going to get $50,000 to $100,000, and I'm just throwing out a number, if I'm getting $50,000 to $100,000 to develop, in other words, bring on a producer's rep, get analytics from Film Profit, get a legal formation together, getting all these elements, getting social media involved, building an audience, getting a budget and schedule that's bondable. All these things have a ticket price. And so let's say that ticket price adds up to $50,000 to $100,000 in development costs. Before you go to Michael Praver and say, hey, Michael, get me $100,000, you need to have a business model in place and have an exit strategy to get out. If you're going to put up $50,000, you better know how you're going to get it back. And the way you're going to get that back is there will be a line item in the production budget to pay back all development costs plus 20%. That's your one exit strategy. The other exit strategy is if you put together this entire package and everything goes south, nothing ever goes wrong, but let's say it does. You put all this together and you have a complete package, you have cast attached, you have all the analytics data, budget and schedule that's bondable, completion bond signed off on it, and you just can't seem to pull the trigger for financing. There is a process which Jeff can elaborate on called turnaround. And that turnaround process, and there's many films that have gone through turnaround, that turnaround process allows you to take your packaged material to a third-party company like Magnolia Pictures. There's a bunch of them out there, Ingram Studios, that all they do is pick up projects and turn around. And they will take the package, they have the resources to get them made. Unfortunately, you as a producer sort of failed, but your investors get paid back, or you, if you invested yourself, get paid back, and you get made whole. So you have to have a business strategy. If you're going to take $50,000 to $100,000, you need to know how you're going to get it back. That's one. So once you get that together and you go, okay, I've got a model, I know what I'm doing, I have an audience for this, I can get this thing funded through the 7A Capline program. I think somebody in the chat had asked what that program was. It is the Small Business Administration's 7A Capline program. You can look it up, it's on their .gov site. If you're going to that model, at least know how you're going to get this money back, so that if you're going to a third-party investor and you're going, hey, give me $50,000, they'll go, great, what do I get out of it? You get your money back plus 20% before we go into production, because there'll be a line item in the production budget to pay back all development costs plus 20%. And you can throw back into them as well. So that's the business of why are we getting development funding? What do we need it for? How are we going to get to the next level? And then there's production funding as well, which is the production costs, which you go through either private equity or debt financing, or in some cases, deficit financing, as Jeff alluded on.
Do you want to talk for a few minutes about the different facilities that you've funded a lot of producers? 63 is a lot, I think. Anyway, you've funded a lot of producers. Can you talk about the things that they most commonly use? Or I guess every story is different, but can you talk about the kind of funding that they mostly use? Is it the case that they go for SBA funding initially, or do they go for business lines of credit, or do they go? Talk a little bit about the kinds of solutions that you've helped filmmakers with.
Are you addressing Michael or me?
Michael.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was for Ray.
No, I was asking you.
Hi, guys. All right. So, yes, we do small business financing. And actually, Ray and I met completely by accident, but it was a wonderful accident. And we have financed 65 filmmakers since meeting Ray. I would say 12, 13 of those weren't for Ray's company. All the others were. But I didn't know anything about film and the needs for development funding until we met. So the majority of people are coming to me for what we're going to call development funding, which is usually, let's call it $75,000 ish. It's not always the same. Now, I'm saying that because I want people to understand that when Ray mentioned that some of the programs for production funding can go up to 100% financing, it's 100% financing for the production, not for the development. You have to have development done before you can get into one of those programs. Even if you know your film will fit one of those programs, you still have to have the development done. That's why people are coming to us. And often they don't have 75, 100, $125,000 lying around. And so that's where we've been instrumental in helping 65 filmmakers so far. The majority of those filmmakers are using that money for development. We have had some people that wanted to use that money directly for production, such as Ray brought me 3 people who needed about 300,000 more to get to the point where they could actually go straight to production because they were doing a very direct to digital kind of film. And in other words, we're not tied directly to development, we're tied to what someone needs. So if it happens to be finishing funds or it happens to be 125 or 150,000 because they're doing a film and simultaneously a graphic novel or some other thing simultaneously, that's fine. We don't really have any say in that. We're really just here to help people achieve their goals. And if their goal is development to get to production, that's great. We'd love to help.
Cool.
Nancy, did that answer the question?
I think it did. I think it talked about a range of solutions, and it has to be really fit to purpose in terms of what you are, what you're trying to achieve from your business model. And also, I'm pretty sure it has to do with what assets and resources and you're bringing to the table, what your work history is. If what's interesting is a lot of the people that are in my group, they actually are, many of them have previous productions. They've done other projects before. They've just never really been able to break the $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 barrier, or they've had a spectacular mistake that cost them some money and they don't want to do that again. And then a lot of them, for a lot of people, film and media are a second career in the sense that they were successful. They were successful either working in the entertainment industry as a director, as an on-set producer, as a series producer, or they're people who have had businesses before. And all of those, and those people, they come with assets and experiences and resources that other folks don't have. So I think there's obviously a lot of variation. And one of the things I like about running the events is that I'm shocked at the sophistication of some of the folks. They just don't know film that well, but they know business. They understand the fundamentals of business. They just don't know how people make money producing films. So Grace, I wanted to ask you, so one of the things that I know for a fact is that when people are going through the process of getting the funding and but more importantly, are getting to putting together the package that they're going to use for their film, they have to provide a whole bunch of resources and assets. For example, they need to have a finished screenplay. They need to have gotten notes on that screenplay and feedback from people who are in the business of actually ensuring a screenplay is good enough to pass muster with distributors and so forth.
We
They
get
have
coverage
come up
done.
with
Then
all of these bits
Jeff's
and
company.
pieces. And
Jeff's company does coverage as well.
can you go ahead and talk for a few minutes about your experience working specifically with producers in terms of what things they need to be able to have, what you expect them to bring with them in order to reach out to you? What's the minimum that you need in order to be able to start helping them?
Oh, definitely. So I'll just go through our steps of what I do when I meet a filmmaker. So up here, I have my email and I have where you can submit your project. And on we'll set up a free Zoom either before you submit your project or after, whatever one you're more comfortable with. But for us to do an evaluation, we have a questionnaire on the submissions form. And then I also have the script, a place for you to upload it. I have a place for you to upload your copyright. We definitely need that. We don't accept unsolicited materials. And if you need help with that, I even have a little paragraph or two on how to go register it with the US Copyright Office, the .gov site. So you can just shoot me an email. And then there's also a place to upload your synopsis. And then there is a questionnaire that I ask that you fill out. And then we'll go over that material and we'll schedule a Zoom meeting just to go over it, see where you're at, see what's needed to go forward with development. And we'll do an assessment there. But those are the main things that I need in the beginning to get started.
That sounds very cool. When you talk about, do you find that most people who are moving through the process are able to provide these things easily, or is it the case that a lot of times when you're talking to them, they don't have these assets and resources in hand?
Yep, sometimes people have a book that they want to turn into a screenplay, or they just have a treatment or an outline. All of those things we can still work with. You would upload the book instead of the script. You would upload your treatment. However, I still need it copywritten. So that is where I'll run into a problem. If they just have a treatment or an outline, you still got to go on the .gov site and get it copywritten, even if it is just the treatment. So that's usually where we'll hit a stumbling block there. But it's not difficult to do. It's just something you got to go register. Really easy to take care of. But that is the most common issue that I run into.
You can't just you don't just tell them to go to the Writers Guild or something like that. They actually have to go to.
Correct. So the
The
guild,
writers-
that's just, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say the Writers Guild is not, they're not a union. They're not any kind of enforcement agency. The going onto the .gov site, the Office of Copyrights, it copyrights it with the federal government. So it's protected. The Writers Guild, registering with the Writers Guild gives you no protection whatsoever. So on that note, I would say a couple things. Keep in mind, if you have just an idea or a treatment, we also have a pretty large stable of credited writers that we can set all those things up for you. We do not charge any upfront fees getting this together because you have to have an idea of whether or not it's going to work or not anyway. So we pretty much just prep you. Here, submit your project. Here's what you're up against. Let's help you either get it copywritten. Let's help you find a writer. Let's help you find those things before we decide to move forward.
Cool. Which is, do you think that, have you ever had people who they've given you a screenplay or what they thought was a screenplay, or they've given you a book or whatever, and you said, this is just not going to work out here. It's
Yeah.
just not, like, this is not going to be a film. Can you talk about how you determine that? Is it just a matter of opinion just because you know so much, or do you have an analytical process that you go through to determine?
Both.
Yeah, we will recommend. I've looked at, unfortunately, I've looked at numerous projects that need a lot of work. Sometimes I'll just give Jeff a call and kind of run it past him, and he'll go, God, no. Or he'll say, hey, maybe it's better as a series, or maybe it's better as a feature format, or maybe it's better as another type of format. But what we will do if we read something and look at it, and sometimes you can just see it needs a lot of work. We will recommend to the client that they get coverage on it first from a third party objective coverage source. And that can cost you $200 to $450. You get that coverage, they give you a full coverage report, and then it at least identifies, here's the problem with this. So what we'll do before we move forward with development, we'll make sure at least it's a marketable product so that we can move it into development through analytics, through these other elements, so that we can at least figure out if this is a marketable project before we get started.
That's very cool. So the other thing I was thinking about is that a lot of times people, maybe it's just because I'm hanging out online and most of the people that I'm reaching out to are online, but a lot of them have interest in doing science fiction projects and so forth, or sometimes they've got graphic novels and they have a notion of trying to do something whether it's a feature animation or if it's just something that sort of looks like is set in another world, in another dimension. Can you talk, in that case, they're probably going to have to purchase equipment, or they're going to be using the Unreal Engine, or they're going to be using some of these space age tools to create those environments. And in that case, they'll be making capital expenditures. And I wanted to ask how do you finance that kind of thing? If it's going to be something that you're going to be using for production, is it something that you would only rent, or is it something that you would tell them, look, you can rent it, it's going to cost you $500,000, or you can buy it, and you can reach out to Michael to talk about how that might be financed?
Keep in mind, again, it's exit strategies. In most
Mhm.
cases, if you're going to be using something like the Unreal Engine software, you're looking at creating background environments or something, that's going to be a line item out of your production budget.
Mhm.
But in some cases, if you've already got things established, I actually know a company that does trailers. And in their case, they may need to go to Michael and they may go, hey, I need $150,000 to set up a studio because I'm doing trailers, but I've got an exit strategy because I have these contracts already. I actually have somebody that we work with who has a studio down in Culver City that they are looking at expanding and creating edit bays, and they're looking at getting some of the software. So those are cases. In that case, it's more of a business setup. But again, it's the business model and an exit strategy. And these people at the studio level, or these people building these facilities, they have specific clients already in place. They have an exit strategy of how they're going to get money back for making this investment. In those cases, absolutely, you should go to somebody like Michael Praver, because he can get you hooked up on equipment, loans, and lines of credit, things of that nature. But if you're looking at something, a science fiction feature film, I'm going to make the next Mandalorian, which they did through AR Wall. I think if you're doing something like that, that's just going to be a line item out of the production budget. And you probably are going to hire somebody who either has that equipment already, like somebody like Digital Domain, or you're going to, if you're going to do it really indie, down and dirty, and you have somebody who knows how to use those tools, then sure, maybe that's something that while you're in development, you pick up those tools if they're reasonable. But again, it's how am I going to get that money back? So
So
I would suggest for things like Unreal Engine, for CGI effects, for things like that, that you just add it as a line item of the production budget.
cool. Michael, can you talk for a few minutes about have you funded studios as well, or people that are doing multiple projects, or people that are doing series, like with development? or
I don't always know who I'm funding, by the way. They don't always tell me what they're really doing, or if they're filmmakers, sometimes they don't have the name of a film yet. So I have no idea what film they're making. They have a concept, or they have a name that's changed 3 more times after they've worked with me. Yes, I am working with a studio right now for raising, I don't know, $500,000 to $700,000. That'll be done in the next 10 days or so. I have done a couple of studio owners previously, but it hasn't really been an ongoing relationship, which would have been nice. Some people come to us once, some people continue to work with us over the years, which is really what we're looking for. But honestly, every we've done equipment, we've done people that actually need to over borrow because they don't have an income, and they're needing to borrow $150,000 because part of it's for development and part of it's to keep them housed and fed while they're going through this process of
Mhm.
filmmaking. Or some people have come to us. I'm not sure Ray and Grace are even aware of this. Some people have come to us and said, we need $20,000 for someone to rewrite the script. And I think what they did was they're really holding off to work with Ray and Grace until the rewrite was done. But I'm not sure that Ray and Grace even knew that was happening. That was a while ago, but we've done a couple of those. Again, we're just here to help access funding if that's humanly possible, but we're
Mhm.
not dictating what it's for.
In other words, you're not like a film investor who says, you're going to get this funding, you're going to do what I tell you to do. It's generally speaking, unless you're working with somebody to help them understand how to do an SBA loan where there has to be a business plan attached and all that.
But in this case, Ray and Grace would be guiding them through the SBA cap line. We would be doing the development up to that point.
Okay,
So it
cool.
would be development funding prior to, because the cap line, if it's done, could be as little as $0 from the filmmaker.
That's very cool. So that's when you think about putting together your projects, one of the things you'd mentioned is that you have to build an audience. And when I remember, like, again, I remember reading Real to Deal and a bunch of these other books, and they said, you'll never get an investor to give you money to build a market or to do marketing or to do advertising. And that seems to me like one of the huge changes over the course of the last, I think it's been changing, and I think this year it's going to be, it's really absolutely key that you can prove you've got a market. Is it the case that you find that people, all of these companies that are giving the minimum guarantees and so forth, do they care? Is it just the talent they think is going to bring the market? Like you get the right actor, like Tom Cruise, and then once you have Tom Cruise, you'll bring a market with him? Or is it the case that they expect you to bring a market?
I think right now with distributors, what's happening is when you're getting a minimum sales guarantee in development, you're bringing on companies that are doing like Prometheus marketing, you're bringing on Ribbo Media, and they're helping you build an audience, which is the preliminary marketing anyway. You're getting an audience of 10,000 to 500,000 people already. So when you're going to a distributor, you've already showed them, hey, I've got an audience built. I'm coming to you and asking for a minimum sales guarantee, but I'm giving you this. And they know they can monetize that social media that you've built, that audience that you've built already. Now, what you were speaking to before was P&A funds. And they used to be, it's still referred to weirdly as P&A funds, but they still refer to it as film, and everybody's used digital for the last decade. So P&A is print and advertising, and that's basically marketing funds. There are numerous companies out there that do P&A funding, and it's last money in, first money out. They will put up the money, they get 25% back on their money, and they get the first money back from the box office, and they attach either through a collection agent or through the box office exhibitor themselves. Hey, payments go directly to me first until this benchmark is met. So there's tons of companies out there that will finance marketing if it makes sense. And if you've gone and gotten minimum sales guarantees from your distributor and you already have an audience, those P&A funds are going to be, they'll be calling you. You don't have to go hunt for them because it makes a lot of business sense for them because they know they're going to get their money back. Now, this is for theatrical release for marketing. If we're talking about streaming, which I see Jeff chomping at the bit there, and I'm sure he was going to step in on this. If we're talking streaming, then in development, you've already created a large audience. While you're in production, you're also using Ribbo Media and Prometheus to build even a greater audience. And then the streaming service is going to have their subscription base and their marketing plan in place as well. So those are things, two different sort of animals that you're talking about. One is theatrical release, which requires P&A and marketing, and the other is a streaming service output deal, which they're going to, if you have it already moving, that they're going to just pick up and run with it and add it to their already existing machine. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it is. I think, Jeffrey, do you want to talk for a few minutes about, if I'm going to Hulu, do they really care if I've got 500,000 people? They've got millions of people. What do they care about my 500,000? If I've got a mailing list full of 500,000 people that say, yeah, I really like the book, and now I'm looking forward to this film so much, and they've got a bunch of followers on TikTok and a bunch of followers on any of the other social platforms. Why do they care about my 500,000 users?
Every production is a marketing problem for them. Every single one. When you go to Netflix, when you go to Hulu, can you see everything there? No. Do you know how closely everything there might match with you, or how do you find, and that's something that people talk about. How do I find what I want or I will love and I will enjoy? That's a marketing problem. I would say, now there have been instances where we're working together on a film. And in the front end, I'll be begging for at least a minimum marketing budget, which is not the same as P&A budget, to set the film up. And it always has to do with the strategy of the film. Every film has a different audience, a different market, and has a different strategy. So we try to craft that strategy and then want to, and if I could insert marketing money every single time, I would
Really?
into the budget every single time I would. Because there are many, even with a producer's rep, you may not have every single base covered with that film's potential market. And as we talked about before, it's about shelf space, right? So what you want to do is get the best shelf space you can. You want to create maximum confidence in your buyer for your product.
When you say shelf space,
Max-
when you say shelf space, I'm thinking, I'm looking back to when there was Best Buy. Remember in the old days, and there was like 20 different new releases in horror, and there's 20 new releases in science fiction. Is that the kind of shelf space you're talking about whenever
I'm
it
actually,
comes out with new stuff?
it's very similar, but I'm talking about the grocery business.
Really?
Because shelf space is bought in the grocery business. Okay. And your cast, the quality of your film, all of that, even wanting to do business with you. Because you've created or developed and or created a product that looks very promising, then they may want to be in business with you. You may, if you're going for a theatrical, you may, even a digital, you may do a festival strategy because of the type of film it is. It's warm and fuzzy, or it's smaller and it's more thoughtful. We have one of those on our hands right now, and I have high margin prospects for it. But every project needs to be taken to the world in a way that is proper for that project. So that's what a strategy is. Ray, did you want to say something?
On that note, one other thing is, you said, does it matter to a streaming service if I have 500,000 viewers already attached to this? It depends on your streaming output deal and how you're taking this to market. Look at AVOD, which is advertising-based video on demand. You go to an AVOD distributor or a streamer and you go, hey, I've got this project. By the way, I have 500,000 people. They're going to go, oh my God, that's 500,000 more people for my advertisers. So absolutely, marketing is critical. One of the questions that came up in the chat was, when do you start doing marketing and advertising and getting all the social media built? You do that in development because you want to have the ammunition to take that out to a distributor, to take that out to a streaming service, to show them that you've built an audience. And that's something that you build out not only in development, but in production as well. That's why you use companies like Prometheus, which what we do, they're one of our vendors. So when a client comes to us and we go into development with them, we're introducing them to Prometheus Marketing. We're introducing them to Ribbo Media. We're helping them build an audience and build social media in development. And that's something that Jeff's company works directly with Ribbo. He works directly with Prometheus, and they work together to find out, not only identify who your audience is, but how to access them directly. And that goes directly into Jeff's marketing reports and his analytics.
What's interesting is it just occurred to me, like I've watched, I'd say one of the reasons I started running events is because I remember going to events trying to figure out how to raise money from investors, and I would literally walk out knowing less than when I went in. They couldn't put the words, here's how you do a Regulation D private placement. And then, God forbid, you should want them to talk about how to do Regulation CF raise or any of those things. It was just like ridiculous. But I haven't heard a lot of people talking about the fact that if you're an independent film producer, you should be producing, you should make sure that you have a marketing budget in development specifically because you're going to have to take the film out and they're going to care about they're going to care about your marketing. They're going to care about the following that you have, and they're going to care about your website. They're going to care about how you framed your project.
Jeff, go first, but I have something to add to that.
You can go first, Ray.
You're
Yeah.
you're so polite.
Okay, I'll do it
Okay.
because I also see a question over here that ties right into this about PR and that type of stuff, PR people. You're gonna have a lot of dragons to slay. When those dragons are slayed by marketing, PR, et cetera. Now, some of it may be in your production budget. So when we're talking about a production budget, I'm going, can we push this part of it up so we've got this once the film's produced and we can do this? But in the front end, are there a couple bucks? But you generally, I even do development budgets which have travel and all of that kind of stuff in it. Every case is a bit different. You want to be able to execute.
But
And
when you're not, when are you actually, I was just remarking on the fact that when I look at all these other, there's a lot of experts in the field. I don't think I've ever heard them. I used to say it a long time ago. I'm like, I always assume, because I've run businesses before, you have to have marketing and you have to have it from the beginning, because how else do you present yourself? I have not heard other people talk about that as something that they do. And when you're doing film analytics, like, you work for a whole bunch of different kind of people. And when people build you projects, even the studios that come to you and they say, hey, I want film analytics for this film that's going to be this project that's going to have $100 million budget. Do you tell them to do pre-marketing and development, or do you tell them to do pre-marketing, like build the marketing budget in?
yeah, usually when they're up in that quote unquote nosebleed range and above, and I worked on those kinds of pictures, then it's twisting and turning the whole thing, because it's a very complex process with many pieces. What we're doing here and what we're talking about, complex, many pieces, but when you get up in the nosebleed range, there's even more pieces and it's even more complex. But I want Ray to get out what he wanted, if I may.
Please.
Thank you.
Forgive me, Nancy. Yeah.
You mentioned private equity, Nancy, and one of the things, everybody always thinks they want private equity for financing until they get it. I've had it 4 times. I've produced 12 films. I don't ever want it again. Private equity is a pain in the ass. It's like inviting your relatives to come live with you. It is really no fun. But regardless of my personal opinion about that, private equity, if you're trying to attract private equity, and let's just go with that for a minute, and you go to them and you go, hey, I got this great idea, it's going to win an Academy Award, they don't care. But what they do care about are things like tax incentives. What they care about are things like marketing. We talked about marketing and building an audience. You go to an investor and you go, hey, I've got this great idea that could win an Academy Award. And they go, okay, if you put my daughter in it, I'll think about it. But when you go back to me and you go, hey, I've got 500,000 people that are accessed audience. I've got tax incentives for you under the 181 tax program. I've got a business model to get you out alive. I've got all these elements that I've looked at from your perspective as an investor. Then you can attract them. I've got distribution, which is guaranteeing that this will get to market. Those are things that you can take to a private equity and entice them to a greater extent, because you've looked at this as a business. And everything's going to tie back to, this is a business that we're doing. Everybody wants to be an auteur, but they have to be business minded.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. All right, I think we've reached the point where I want to start opening up for questions. As always, I'm going to go ahead and read the questions. There's going to be some in the chat. If you have questions and if you're on the call and you want to post something in the chat window, you're only talking to the members of the panel. You can pretty much say anything that you want, and then you can also click the Q&A button, and I'll be reading those out as well. I want to mention that you can reach out to any of the people that are currently on the panel. You can reach out to the MPMG. The information's on Grace's. Grace has got tired of typing this 400 times. And we did an event. we did an event just recently talking about film, how to make your film easier to get funded. And then we have another one coming up where we're going to talk about what working with producers reps and how producers actually get guarantees. And I think Grace just said, I can't take it. This typing, I'm not, I have 400 people asking me the same question. So she put it on her little flyer. But you feel free to reach out to any of the folks on the call. I think that Ray's probably the easiest to approach, but Michael Praver, you can also reach out. Feel free to ask questions. One of the reasons we're doing the call is because we want people to ask questions. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly dive into the Q&A. Paul wants to know, how many projects are you working on now? All the people on this panel, they have projects they work on in association with one another, and they also have many projects they work on independently. So I'm going to answer for them, but I could pretty cheerfully say hundreds. So you could just figure out how many. I don't know how to answer that question for like diverse peoples.
Paul, that's a nebulous question. I think if you're asking me personally, I've got 2 projects that I'm developing. Our company is developing a dozen or 2 dozen projects right now for clients in various stages. We have about a half a dozen films that are getting financed this year. That's a really tough question to ask and get a specific answer out of, but I hope that helps somewhat.
Cool. Robin said he was having trouble with audio, but I bet you figured it out because we have audio. Hopefully. Otherwise, people ask, so if you're on this call, you're going to get an email. It is being recorded. I'm going to edit it. And if you're on you signed up to attend the call, you will get a link that lets you watch it later. And that's one of the benefits you got because you attended live, or you signed up to attend. Generally speaking, the way I make my money is that people who like my events or who like the training that I provide in how to publish a book or how to make a micro budget feature or how to produce a micro budget documentary, et cetera, they sign up for membership at Nancy Fulton meetups and spend all of $20 a month or something, like some amount a year, and they get access to all the videos that I do. Eugene asks, have any of you used financing where the investor could get their investment back plus a profit before the film is released?
I'm not sure how that model works, but
I think Eugene might actually be in Canada. I'm not sure
Okay.
if that's true, but I think it may be the case. And so they may get 40% financing. Yeah.
Even better, in Canada, they have bank-backed production schemes with networks, et cetera, and the Canadian Film Funding. I've worked on multiple projects like that. But that's not the same really as funding or making a profit or having it completely sold before when it's finished. Even with MGs, I've worked on pictures with multiple MGs and multiple finance schemes and bank loans and all of that. And it's just, I don't know how you
have to make
achieve that,
make a
right?
profit. It's a business, right?
yeah, and I think
Yeah.
Jeff just hit on something interesting, which is I have it up on my screen. It's 45% provincial tax rebate through Montreal, Quebec, all these areas, mostly East Coast. Vancouver's a little less, it's at 40%. But they have tax rebates in these provinces. But it basically, the contract reads, hey, look, if you're an investor and you put up development funding, you get that back out of a line item in the production budget, so you're made whole. But if you're talking about an investor who invested in production funding, any credits, rebates, any incentives that come back, they get earmarked to pay back the investor first. So I don't know that it's before the production's finished, but because sometimes they have 30 to 60 days delivery time and they have specific requirements contractually. But that's another question that's a little vague, but just to tell you how the model works generally for tax rebates, say you go to Georgia, say you go to Quebec, Montreal and you're up in Quebec and you shoot something, they're giving you 45% back as a tax rebate. You'll get that back 60 to 90 days later. They'll want to see that you have a distribution model in place and want to see a bunch of other requirements before they pull the trigger on that. But it is basically mitigating your risk of investment by having these incentives in place.
So it's not meant, it's a misuse from their perspective if you're not actually making a profit. So I think you mentioned deficit financing is not exactly the same as a negative pickup deal. They give the person, they say, we will underwrite this credit line so you can produce the film. And if we like what you release, we will go ahead, we will pay off that
Correct.
financing.
Correct. Yeah, negative pickup deals are usually with a distributor, and that's for a theatrical release or something. And they're going, hey, look, we think we're going to make this much money, so we're going to give you a minimum sale guarantee, or an MG, as Jeff pointed out, or we'll give you a negative pickup deal. Negative pickup deals are gone the way of the dinosaur. It's usually either minimum sales guarantee today or a deficit financing model through a streaming service or a studio.
Cool. So somebody said,
If
go ahead.
if I could add a filigree to the deficit financing, the reason it's called deficit financing is because there's a carryover loss. There's a gap there between what it costs and what you need to recoup it. So you look to other markets to fill that gap. Sorry, I just wanted to.
No, that's good to know. It's really good to know. So Sean says, as a screenwriter director, what's the best way to get your script into the right hands? So I would just mention, Sean, that many people who are screenwriters and directors are becoming producers specifically because trying to get somebody to purchase a screenplay is increasingly difficult these days, because it's easier for people just to hire the writer. They'll usually, if you're a producer, you're just like any other business owner. If I'm saying I'm going to develop a house, I have a notion in mind of what house I'm going to develop, or what apartment building I'm going to develop, or what business park I'm going to develop. I have it in my head what I want, and I just hire a guy to do it for me. I'm not looking for a script. If I wanted a script, I'd just pay some guy to make it.
That is so correct, Nancy. And it's funny that you and I haven't had that conversation yet on the side, but it is, if you're going to be a writer and you want to get it in the right hands, your hands are the right hands. All you need is the resources like Michael Praver. You need the resources like Jeff Hardy. You need the resources of a good producer's rep, but step up and make your own project. I think a lot of people think they're going to walk up and shake the magic money tree and everything's going to fall in place. You have to make a business. Look, I started out as a writer, and I realized that writers are the ugly redheaded stepchildren of the film industry. And so I stopped just writing and started producing. And I think if you're a writer, then if you just want to sell your script, get a good literary agent. Go to APA, they have a great lit rep agency, and then get an agent to try to hawk your wares. But if you want your film made, then I would suggest to every person listening, consider starting your own business and making your own film.
The other thing I would say is I was a member of a pretty famous group on Facebook called 20 Books to 50K. And their basic statement was, if you write 20 books, you can reach 50K in recurring revenue, which is true actually for some folks. It depends on what your book is, etc. Now, what's interesting is some of the people there are screenwriters, and what they do is they write the books first. And then if to the extent that you can sell a project, it has a lot to do with having a book or a book series and a following, and then maybe a producer will find you somewhat interesting. A lot of times those folks have millions and millions of people that are following them, and they still can't get somebody to buy their screenplay. They have millions of followers. They have millions of people who give them, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and they still can't get a producer to give them to buy their screenplay. And one of the things I get stressed out about when you run a group like mine, where I'm constantly telling people, here's ways to go forward. And there's a million, I always tell people, it's Hollywood, nobody knows anything. You may be, Blair Witch actually happened, Paranormal Activities actually happened, all these things actually happened. You may be that guy. But generally speaking, my experience is that there's being discovered in this town, it's of a crazy thing. You can spend your whole life waiting to be discovered, and it's just not going to happen. And if you really like to write and you really do not want to become a producer, I strongly urge you to write books. Write lots of books. Write lots and lots of books because they generate revenue and it gives you a better chance of actually being able to sell something that's going to turn into a film. But just writing screenplays, spec screenplays, just seems to me, I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people who have been on writers on award-winning series who cannot sell a screenplay. Award-winning series. They have gotten awards on television as writers, as lead writers, and they have not been able to sell their project. It breaks my heart because people waste their lives.
And if you look at things like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, if you look at all these like kind of motivational books on how to become successful, they all say do it yourself. Don't expect anybody else to step up for you. And I think in this town, in Hollywood, that's definitely a truism. You absolutely need to step up yourself. Look at people like Robert Rodriguez and Lawrence Bender and Quentin Tarantino. They started out and did it themselves. Lawrence got Reservoir Dogs financed. I know him. And he said it was the hardest. He went to 20 banks. And when he finally did it, they went to Miramax and said, it's financed. All we need is you to distribute it. And so on that note, here's the thing I've discovered about distributors. They are incredibly lazy and unimaginative, but if you do their job for them, they will give you a minimum sales guarantee. Now, listen to this and keep it in mind because it applies to everybody else in Hollywood. People are asking, how do I get a producer? How do I get a producer's rep? Well, by the way, on a producer's rep, I saw that question in the chat. We can provide names to competent and reliable producers, representatives who can get you distribution. That's all part of the development process that we do with Moving Pictures Media Group. But people go, how do I get a producer? If you do a producer's job for them, they'll come running to you. And you go, then what do I need them for? Exactly. You can do it yourself. And if you provide things like, hey, I've got an audience. Hey, I've got these things. I've got these elements. I have an award-winning graphic novel. It's based on a novel. I'm already building an audience. I've already done analytics. I've already gotten all of these elements in place. Producers are unfortunately, and I'm a producer, so this sucks. Producers are unfortunately like distributors. They're lazy and unimaginative. But if you do their job for them, then they'll step up. And in some cases, you can't distribute yourself. You can produce yourself. So I would say step up if you really want to make your film. There are resources out there like Michael Praver. There are tons of resources out there to get you across the finish line so that you can actually make your project. But again, treat it like a business. We should probably answer a few more questions. I see.
Yeah,
a
we
bunch
should.
of
We
them
should.
there.
Lightning round.
Yeah.
Lightning rounds. Kathy Constantine says you work with creators outside the United States. I think you guys have helped people who had projects in Canada and so forth, right?
And Romania and the UK, yes.
Australian.
We did have somebody from Australia, but they wound up retiring, I think.
And Michael, you
I-
can help them though.
That
Michael,
doesn't
I-
work. That doesn't work so well for me. We use the American banking system, and we have literally tried Puerto Rico, we have tried Mexico, and we have tried Canada. And let me tell you, we are simply not successful. We were able to get somebody maybe 20%, 15% or less of our estimate in Canada. They have very few banks. They all talk to each other. We can't play any of the games that we play in America in Canada. So that doesn't mean you can't use money somewhere else. That means that the borrowers have to be in the US for us. That doesn't mean you have to come to us. If there was someone else who could help you in another country, I'm going to just say beware and make sure you don't pay up front. We don't charge anything
yeah.
up front. We only charge upon success. That's why we have never had a complaint in 14 and a half years.
Right.
And on that note, if you're in Canada and you have a production, find an American producer. And part of it is you don't have to go to Moving Pictures Media Group. There's tons of other development service companies out there, but if they're reputable, they should be able to point the direction, go, here's some producers, here's some writers if you don't have a full script, here's the resources you need in order to develop this properly to get it to market. Jeff, I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you.
Oh, no. Yeah, definitely. as a matter of fact, some of the middling and some of the biggest and also some of the smallest projects that I've worked on have been in Iceland, Africa, Great Britain, France, Italy. You can develop a picture, you can model a picture, you can do a business plan for a picture, but you do have to be cognizant of what the different elements are
Cool. I'm gonna
in doing it. And every country works a bit differently, yeah.
Right. I think, like you said, mostly developing them in America, especially if you're an American, is a good idea for wide reasons.
Oh, yeah, definitely, definitely.
I'm going to go through a bunch of answers really quickly. Speak up if I've got it entirely wrong, but I think you'll agree with me. You mentioned that you want, Gina asked, you mentioned that you want notes and feedback from people who understand what it takes to bring a film to market. I work with a mentor who's on fire about my script, who's an Academy nominated writer, etc., and producer, but it can't just be about his name. Can you qualify this a little further? I think we've already talked about our relationship with screenplays and so forth, and how we really think you just have to become the producer if you actually want to make sure it's going to get made. No screenwriter. Seriously, it's tragic. There are people who are some of the best writers in the world. If you're not Aaron Sorkin, you got troubles if you're a spec screenwriter. Is there a genre or topic you'd shy people away from producing right now? Historical drama, everyone says it's hard, but they keep getting made by the big streamers. The big streamers have $300 million to spend. You don't, if you're a normal person trying to put on a historical drama and it's a costume drama, it gets a bit on the dodgy side because you do not have $300 million to spend. So that is that's the problem that you might run into. And there's one nice thing about science fiction stuff is you can just put somebody in an outfit that, like a bodysuit that they look really good in, and then you can put special effects around them, and then it's base. So that's not exactly how costume dramas work. Those corsets are really hard.
If I may comment to that, genre is not really specifically an issue, but your budget and your business model are. So keep that in mind. I want to do a period costume drama, Les Miserables, great. Do you have the money? Can you get the money? And can you get the money back? So look at it as a business before you go, oh, I can't do this genre.
Right.
And same thing, everybody says I'm down on documentaries. I'm not down on documentaries. They're just super hard to monetize.
Yeah,
If
I
you
know.
can figure out a way to monetize it, then God bless you. Go make a documentary. But
That's
don't make it as a passion project.
that's very true. Mark Sanders says, I finished my film and editing. What's the best way to market it after you finish the film? One of the things that I'd asked Ray earlier this week, I'd said, so do you take consultants? Like, do you provide consulting? And he said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, it was something along the lines of, the problem is when I do consulting, a lot of times the project is already, it's usually, it's produced or it's in development. Money's already been spent. It's been spent incorrectly. And it's not going to be the kind of thing that's easy to fix. So I'd rather just work on projects that I can build right from the ground up. Did I get that right?
You got that pretty close. I've done consulting in the past for people who have films that they just for some reason got all the way made somehow and didn't have distribution, didn't have a marketing plan, didn't have build an audience, they hadn't done analytics. And I will usually, it's closing the barn door after the horse left, but I'll usually introduce them to Jeff Hardy and I'll say, hey, look, you're going to need some analytics. You're going to need this. Here's Jeff. He can provide that. It's going to show you who the market is and how to reach them. You're going to need some other elements here. You're going to bring on a producer's rep. And by the way, that's going to cost you money. So here's this guy named Michael Praver who can get you fun. Now, that is totally backwards method of development, but it is salvageable. I just don't like taking money from somebody as a consultant when they've already dug a hole for themselves and don't know how to get out of it. I think you should do it right the first time. But if you have gone all that way down the road and you're like, hey, I got my film edited, what do I do? Okay, we're going to have to retroactively build some of this, but it is possible. You're not You're not sunk.
So they can reach out to you, but it's not really the business model that you have. There's a bunch of other questions. Some of these questions you can reach out directly to Grace with. If I'm not getting to them, I'm not answering them in some cases because they're not questions that like every person is likely to have. So there's a number of people on the call, and we want to make the questions relevant to everybody.
May I address a question that came up in the chat?
Actually, I want to mention one thing to Steve. Stephen, if you want to take a look at the credits that Moving Pictures Media Group has, or go to the webs and film the projects, some of the projects that Mr. Hardy has worked on, you can go to their websites. You will be able to see lists of projects. You will be able to, and if you have more questions about credits, you can reach out to them. And then, let's see.
If I can address one real
Yeah,
quick.
go ahead.
Linda had, can you comment on the likelihood of original story screenplay succeeding versus the glut of adaptations? I think a good story is a good story, whether it was adapted from other source material or whether it's original. Again, it goes back to what's the business model to get this thing made? And whether it's adapted from something else original, is it a good story? Do I have a business model? Can I get this thing developed and funded? And that's really, I hope that answers the question, but that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Cool. So Kyle says, I'm from the UK. What's the best way for me to trademark my material? Okay, Kyle. So 1, I'm not an attorney, and 2, I'm not in the UK, but 3, generally speaking only for myself, my understanding is that copyright is what you do with a screenplay because it's a literary work. And when you register it at the Copyright Office, which I think you can do from the UK, even here, you can register it at copyright.gov. Do not take me at my word. I know
There is
that
a
you
UK
register in
registry.
the UK as well.
There is a
I think
UK registry.
But copyright does go worldwide. So, but regardless, it's trademark is a whole different thing. And if you go to Nancy Fulton meetups and click the link to see our videos, there's a lawyer who talks about copyright and talks about things like trademark. They're totally different things. Do you guys see any other questions you wanted to take on in the chat window? There's such a lot going on over there. I was going through the question and answer window.
If I may, there's a fellow named Raheem Branch, I believe it's a gentleman. Wanting to know about film analysis and risk mitigation, and I'll try to make this brief. But it's like 360, analysis is 365. Looking at the project itself, is it scripted? Is it, et cetera? Does it look like it's doable? Ray works from a different viewpoint, production, et cetera. Then what's the audience? What films can it be compared to reasonably? And I have a little article on my website, how to choose comparable films. And then you have to start looking at how the business is structured now. And so then what model would we use to understand how it fits into the market? And then the comparable pictures are analyzed and used to try to give us some guidance into understanding it. But quite often now we're literally modeling for exclusive digital delivery, either domestically or globally or in some broken up fashion. But generally it's almost global because a lot of it's going that way. And if you've done a good analysis, and then there are steps you can take to mitigate the risk, marketing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But everything in analysis is about trying to get ready for risk mitigation.
Exactly.
Sorry, did I answer? I hope I answered that.
Oh, you
well.
did. You did. We are going to go ahead and jump off the call. Again, if you go to you can Google any of these people and you will be able to find their website. If you Google Ray Ellingson, you will be able to, Ray Ellingson Moving Pictures Media Group, you'll be able to find him. The information is very cleverly placed on Grace's screen because she didn't have to type it 200 times. Jeffrey's at Film Hardy. Sorry, Jeffrey Hardy is at filmprofit.com. Michael Praver, his is the funny one. Funding,
You can
funding,
just-
funding.
Yeah, it's just easier to go to funding.com and anybody can schedule a Zoom call at no charge
Yeah.
at their convenience.
Right. So you can always find me at nancyfultonmeetups.com. And if you go, there's a link there that'll take you to the video library. I will be sending out a link going forward. So you'll have an ability to watch this video, which you've taken the time to participate in for free. We do have another one coming up where we're going to, I have another event coming up, which is actually on Eventbrite. But we have another one I'm doing with Ray. And Jeffrey talking to a producer's rep. And we'll talk, a producer's rep is different than a sales agent. And we're going to talk about why that matters to you. Like who sales agents work for versus who producers reps work for, and how they actually get you minimum guarantees and how they actually get you distribution, which you need in order to put your project together. I'll be announcing that shortly. And if you take advantage of the link that I sent out to watch the video, and you will be put on the mailing list. So you'll be hearing about that free workshop as well. So do you guys, anybody else have some final words?
Thank you, Nancy, for such a great job as host. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much.
Have a
All
good
right,
night.
thanks, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Good night.